First, I just want to introduce myself. I know those of you who are in the room already have joined us for the second time, but my name is Becky Fry. I am the principal planner with the City of Redmond's Long Range Planning Team. I am one of the project managers for the Redmond 2050 project, which is how we are reevaluating and potentially updating this vision for the city and the city's future. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and we'll get started. So this evening's workshop is an introduction to inclusive and universal design and how we're using those terms in our project and what we're doing here at the City of Redmond. In this particular workshop, we're just introducing these topics. We do anticipate that this will be a conversation with the community that will be an ongoing one over the next 2 to 3 years. There's a lot of different parts of this. There's some complexities of some of the conversations, and we do anticipate it's going to be several years of conversations before we actually really get a good grip on what we're looking for. We are using Menti tonight. If you want to go to menti.com and enter this code, or I will pop this link in chat real quick so you can just click on it. There you go. If you do go to menti.com, just enter 8196487. And again, if you have any issues logging in, just let me know. Yeah, okay, great. All right, thank you. Glad to see that it's working. And I do apologize in advance. I've got a cold, so I will try to mute when I hear a big cough and sneeze coming on. That I might miss one or two. All right, and just really a reminder for those of you who have joined us before, but for those who are listening to the recording and might not have participated in some of our other workshops, what we're looking at is a project with 3 major themes: equity and inclusion, sustainability, and resiliency. And all 3 of these themes are going to be woven throughout the entire project. Tonight, we're really going to be looking at equity and inclusion, but there are some overlaps with sustainability and resiliency. So that's definitely a part of the component, but the focus really is on equity and inclusion this evening. So from a regional standpoint, we define equitable development as both public and private investments, programs, and policies in neighborhoods that are really focused and intended to meet the needs of marginalized populations, reduce disparities, and improve access to education, employment, just healthy environments, affordable housing, and transportation. So just in general, it's a term for equitable development. But what are we looking at and what do we mean and how does that impact our built environment when we actually really get to the nitty-gritty of how our community is built? So what we're looking at, and we're going to be really focusing on for the next couple of years, are what are our community's needs from a built environment standpoint, especially historically marginalized groups or those who have never participated or are underrepresented in planning processes and policies historically. So we definitely really want to understand what our community needs are from the perspective of our community members. And we're really going to be focused on trying to identify what policy and regulatory changes we need to be looking at. So it could be revisions to our existing policies, or it could be new policies, services, codes. So we're just really looking at what needs to be adopted or changed or modified, because we really want to put something in place and adopt it to move these things forward. So that's going to be the focus and intent of the next couple of years of conversations around equity and inclusion in our built environment. So before we get started, I'd really love to just get your thoughts, and as we start to think about what aspects of our physical community really can keep people away from certain areas or certain programs, certain aspects of our community. So you see here some examples that have popped up. Some of these are from our noon event, so please feel free to jump in. High-speed roads, yes, that's actually come up a couple of times. Yeah, just the speed and the comfort level of being near or around traffic can exclude people from certain areas. It makes them uncomfortable. Car-centric design, lack of sidewalks, steep stairways, or even steep sidewalks. Yeah, so, all right, great. So These are all great examples of how the actual built environment can have negative consequences and how we um, get full participation of community members in their community. So these are definitely areas that we're going to be looking at for sure. So what does inclusive design mean and how are we using it? We're definitely going to be relying on reaching out to people and getting their perspectives. So that's what we're looking at inclusive design. It's that process of being as inclusive as we can. As I mentioned, it's really going out to the folks who have never participated or very rarely participated in this planning process of how the community identifies its vision. How does the community establish its priorities that guide the day-to-day decision-making process? And making sure that all of those voices are heard from their perspective. And so this is what that "Nothing About Us Without Us" slogan. It's been around for a couple of decades. We really are looking to really live that and definitely hear the voices of our community members. So inclusive design, as I mentioned, is a process. It considers the diversity and the uniqueness of our community. So we really want to understand our community. So this means all of the demographic groupings that we could potentially think of. So we have diversity of ages, languages, abilities. We definitely have some gender issues and diversity there as well. Um, we're looking at all of our community members and all of their needs. And so this is one example from Northwest University Design Council that they shared at a workshop not that long ago. It showed all the different ways that you can potentially look at the built environment and how you can be inclusive. So language definitely is one way, socioeconomic, how much things cost to get through, the how people get around their mode of transportation, how they are motivated to get around, what are their intents, their objectives, all of those things could matter. So really inclusive design is placing people at the heart of our design process. It's really focusing on not the specific code, but the specific outcomes and what our community needs. It's all about offering choice and understanding that one way of doing things doesn't necessarily meet everybody's needs. And so understanding that we might need more than one way to address a particular situation or a particular area of our community. And it's looking at ways to be flexible and adaptable. And it may involve different tools and techniques. It may involve technology and services or some combination thereof. So some packaging of those to address those needs. So before we go too much further, I do want to recommend that you go out and take a look at the video that the mayor just released this week. She's asking for community members to help respond to the questions she has of what does a welcoming community mean to you. We encourage you to go read that. It's a great opportunity to meet Cecilia. She's our new diversity, equity, and inclusion manager. And please do respond on her video comment. That's where she's collecting the comments, but we'll actually be reading and gathering those for our outreach as well. And then we have Welcoming Week is actually September 10th through 19th. That's coming up really quickly. And we encourage you to go out to Welcoming Redmond site and participate in those events and activities as well. So universal design, and how does that differ from inclusive design? So universal design really is the construction. It's the how things are built, not necessarily the process, but the actual physical construction and what it looks like after it's constructed. So it's your homes, your landscapes, your streetscapes. It can include architectural features, but it also really is a looking at your retail space and commercial spaces, your parks and open spaces and gathering spaces, and how you get there and how you find your way around, and even lighting. And the whole goal of universal design is to make sure that every person in your community, regardless of their age or ability, can access all aspects of your community. So that's how we're using universal and inclusive design. If you do Googling, sometimes they're used interchangeably, but this is how we're using it for our project. So some of the universal design principles that we are going to be moving forward, and these are standard, um, are inclusive and equitable. Everyone can use it safely, easily, and with dignity. So responsive means that it's really responsive to what they need. So it's not something that is assigned to them as a particular solution, but actually is responding to a specific and specified need of the community. It needs to be flexible so different people can use it in different ways. It needs to be convenient and comfortable so everybody can use it without too much effort or separation. If the access or alternative is to make somebody go around to the back side of the building and that's the only way they can get there, that's definitely a separation. It's not convenient, it's not comfortable. It needs to be accommodating and intuitive. So for all people, regardless of their age, gender, mobility, ethnicity, or circumstances. It needs to be welcoming and perceptible. It needs to be easy to understand with no barriers that are excluding certain people or some groups of people. It also needs to be realistic. So there needs to be more than one solution to balance people's needs. And again, not one, there's very rarely going to be one solution that works for everybody in the community. So it needs to be realistic. And so these are the universal design principles, and we're going to be moving forward with them and what they mean in our built environment. We are looking for the sweet spot. So we have mentioned inclusive design. Accessibility is something that people are really familiar with as a phrase, but if you think about accessibility and how it's used in a built environment, it's usually um, those minimum requirements, those things that you have to build. So it could be just that ramp or certain widths of sidewalks that are the bare minimum. So accessibility is really not going to meet the full needs of the community. And in some cases, it's really, really the bare minimum. And so we're trying to get where that interacts with inclusive and usability. So accessibility is the attribute, inclusive design is the process or method that we're using, and universal design is the actual construction, and we're going to hit somewhere in the middle. We're looking for it. So I've got several examples of universal design from lots of different ways that our communities are built, just to really help you understand what this means. And I've added some examples that we didn't see at our noon event because they asked for more examples. So um, we will go through these. Feel free to pipe in and unmute if you have any questions on any of these. But just remember that these are just examples that I just pulled to show you how universal design could be implemented in lots of different ways throughout our community. So this first one really is about signage. So this is an example from the city of Seattle. They're looking at everything from how high it's done to the fonts, to contrasting colors, languages, and then Braille. And here's an example where they're incorporating Braille and tactile information on streetlights to help really address wayfinding issues for the blind. So not all sight challenged, the blind could be any range of visual impairment, but not everybody reads Braille. So that won't be a solution for everybody, but it is a solution for those who do need the assistive reassurance that they are where they think they are. So another example is actually using tactile paving or pavers or bricks of some kind on the surface. This is something that we're familiar with seeing in the bumps for blind users, but it's actually really helpful for all users. So it's another way that is a universal way of identifying something visually without having to do a lot of words. So this is an example from Sound Transit and how they're going to be using this to identify where the doors are going to be. And then they're using these pavers on the ground to help provide directions to get from one area of a station to another. We're thinking about maybe using this as an idea for wayfinding within the community, actually putting something in the sidewalk that provides instructions on how to get to the light rail stations. So this is just one example that we're really interested in looking at. Again, you don't necessarily have a lot of language in there, so you don't have a language barrier. It's really easily intuitive, and there might be lots of different ways that we could utilize this concept. So here's just one example of how one community decided to do that. They actually did different types of textures in different places. So not just the actual use of texture, but they actually worked with the community to create a texture pattern with meanings. And so the folks could quickly identify where they were and what they were experiencing in the community as they navigated the community based on the different textures. So one example that came up at lunch was a request or desire for baby changing stations in every restroom. So we often have issues with that. If you've got a small child, not having a clean place to clean them, but also you see that a lot where they might have one in the women's restroom, but not the men's restroom. So if you're a single dad or you're just the dad with the kids out that day, you were having challenges. So that was the request. I expanded on this a little bit beyond that because there's also these changing spaces. So folks who need to get out and about in our community that have physical limitations. So maybe they have MS or maybe they have some type of other impairment that makes them a quadriplegic or some other way where they need an attendant. And they might not be a small child. They might be an adult or a large child. They need a place to change as well. And oftentimes they're not able to fully participate in the community because there's no place to change them safely and cleanly. And they might have to clean and change on the floor or go home. And so it limits their ability to fully participate in the community. So these changing places are being incorporated in some communities in key locations like community centers, like light rail stations, like um, city halls, and that type of frequently accessed public areas, so that they have a safe and clean place to be changed that would allows them to be out in the community all day long if they need to be or want to be. So that's just one way that can be done from a universal design perspective. A couple other examples regarding seating. Obviously, having seating frequently throughout the community is really helpful for seniors, for parents, children, taking them on walks. Having seating near playgrounds can often be a challenge. I can't even tell how many times when my son was little, we'd go to a playground and there'd be no place for me to sit. And we couldn't stay very long because I have a really bad back and I need to be seated. And not only I am so sorry. My internet just dropped me from the phone. Okay. Okay. So, all right. Any thoughts or ideas? We can move on. All right. Um, if you have any experience working with universal design, we'd love to know. And we would love if you could share your thoughts and experience with that if you have. So, anyone who has any particular experiences with universal design?
I've worked a little bit with guide dogs for the blind, and I've seen the sidewalk modifications that you talked about with the different types of, I guess, bumps and ridges and things like that. Were showed to us as as I was a volunteer, so it was kind of an educational opportunity. But I think that's a great thing to do. Not only does it help people get around, but I think it looks good, depending on what's being used, what materials are used. And I agree that it also just helps anyone else get places. The idea of showing people how to get to the light rail station somehow in the sidewalk. I think that's a great idea. Not only, like I said, is it visually appealing, but it's also really helpful. The other thing that I was thinking about was signage in terms of, I like the idea of the contrast, but also the size of the signage. And, sometimes our signs are fairly small with fairly small print, and that can be hard for people to see.
Right.
Those are a couple ideas I had.
No, that's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Great. Well, again, we're going to be working this conversation for a couple of years, so we'll definitely be gathering folks. But if you know of anybody who has experience working with universal design that you think we would be a good contact for us to do some stakeholder interviews for, we'd love to get that and share. But moving on, I use this cartoon as an example about how it's not just how we build the community, it's really also about how we maintain it and service it. So in this example, in this cartoon,
We can't see your screen, Becky.
Uh-oh. Let's see. Let me see if I can fix that. Let me troubleshoot this for a second. Fine. I apologize for that. Technology only works when it works, right?
So true.
All right, let me try this again. All right, let me. I think I've got it here. There we go. Can you see it now?
Yes, I can see it now. Thanks.
All right. So this cartoon really illustrates, again, is not about just how it's built, it's what we do with it after it's built. And so the child in the wheelchair is asking, can you just shovel the ramp first? Then we can all get in. But the response is, all of these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I'm done with them, then I'll clear the ramp for you. And really, it's, if you shovel the ramp, everybody can get in. So it's really all about what we do with our community even after it's built too. So it all needs to be incorporated and thought about, and we're going to be looking at all of those policies as we move forward as well. One of the other areas that we're going to be looking at is really a subset of universal design. It's called visitability. It is a certain subset, as I mentioned, that's specific to new homes when they're built. So it's the incorporation of specific accessibility features as just a routine process. And so just some examples could be that no step entry. One entry into the house would not require a step. Wider hallways so that you have navigability, a ground floor restroom that is accessible to a wheelchair. It could also include features like building in reinforcements in the walls in case at some point in the future it needs to be transitioned to fully ADA accessible. It makes it just a small addition at construction, but it saves the homeowner a lot of money later on as they need to age in place and want to stay in their home. It increases sustainability of the building because it makes it more usable for more people for a much longer time. So this is just one way that we're looking at increasing universal design in our community, but also really does contribute to sustainability of the community as well. So I'd love to just open the floor and see if you guys have any thoughts, ideas, questions before we move on, or anything to add to the conversation. Mhm.
I don't have anything else. Thanks, Becky.
Okay. All right. Well, feel free to unmute as we go through. I've got some resources I'd love to share too before we close out. But before we do much more, based on just kind of your first thought, as we start to look at this conversation, and we'll ask this question many times throughout this process, but can you think of any areas or features within our community today that we need to revisit, that may need to be redesigned or tweaked in some way to be a little bit more inclusive or a lot more inclusive for our community members? Is there anything that you know of in our community today that we need to take a look at? Okay. Let's see. Gender neutral bathrooms. Okay. Yeah. It's definitely more universal and inclusive. Yeah. Marymore Park is largely car centric and needs to be more walker friendly. Would definitely, Marymore Park is in Key County, but there's a lot in Marymore that we could do as Marymore gets redeveloped and as the station gets goes live to increase the connection there and improve the walkability, at least access into the park for sure. Yeah, and please feel free to add more ideas as we go over. This is again a question that we're going to be looking at pretty frequently. Okay. So there's a couple of resources I would highly recommend. If you're not familiar with the organization East Side for All, it's here on the East Side. They are doing a series called Build for Belonging, and it is an excellent series. I highly recommend it. And they also have an idea Padlet that has a lot of ideas the community members are submitting. So Northwest Universal Design Council is based out of Seattle, and just their website is Environments for All. They have a lot of resources on universal design, and they have done a lot of events and activities over the last several years, and their archives on their About Us page are really a good place to browse through for information. So I highly recommend those. We do have a lot of other information. Don't try to drag this in today. Just right now, I am going to be posting this. It's going to be online so folks can click through these. But I just wanted to share some ideas of places to start for folks who are really interested in these topics and want to dive a little bit deeper. Eastside for All has a transformative placemaking resource on their website. The Project for Public Places has Inclusive by Design and a Foundation for Diversity in Public Space. The American Society of Landscape Architects has a Universal Design and Universal Design in Landscaping. That's a really interesting and informative site. AARP has a lot of information about visitability, livability, aging in place. They have a ton of information on that. If you're looking and interested in designing for specific community needs, these are just some places to start. There's some autism-friendly design ideas, designing for the blind in mind, designing for neurodiversity and inclusion, and designing for special populations. And this one is from the Northwest Design Council. It's a video of a presentation they did a couple years ago. There's a couple of more that we would recommend. Again, I'm going to post all of these on the web so you can look through which ones you might be interested in. There's inclusive emergency planning, making multicultural places, land use planning through aging and gender lenses. And this one is interesting to me, especially in the light of going taller and Overlake, planning for children in vertical communities. What do they need from that perspective? So again, a lot of different resources. It's just the very beginning of a lot of conversations that we're going to be having, but we would love as many people as possible to join in this conversation. And if you have any resources that you know of that we should be looking at, we'd love to hear them. We don't have to spend a heck of a lot of time on this particular slide today, but I do want to remind you that I am always, always, always asking the question, what do I not know that I do not know? So there's a lot of people around who have a lot of resources that I've just never heard of so far. So I'd love to hear them. And again, if you have not seen and participated in our questionnaire on our Let's Connect site, we have a questionnaire about housing, economic vitality, and transportation policy options. We'd love for you to participate in that. There's a link on our website and the QR code will take you directly in there. Our upcoming workshops on the 16th, we're going to be looking specifically at Overlake and what do we want to see as it starts to redevelop. And we're going to be spending some time on the Overlake as an international district idea, what that might look like, how we would see that actually visualized and on the ground and built in our community. Our next equity and built environment is going to really deep dive into the general needs of our communities, services and amenities. And then we're going to come back to Overlake in October and look at land uses and development standards around our light rail stations. We do anticipate having more. We are definitely going to be scheduling some workshops on our climate vulnerability assessments towards the end of the year, and there will be several other workshops as well. We've just done a series of introductions to certain topics, so we're definitely going to come back and do a second round and third round on some of these conversations. So we'd love to have you join us again. Again, this is our website, and this is me, Becky Fry, Principal Planner, and how to reach me. We have made it through what we have for this evening, but I am here and open if you have any other questions, anything about the vision of the community, anything about growth and development and redevelopment. You've got me. I am here. I'm happy to chat about anything that I know anything about.
Becky, could you remind me again what the timeline is on Redmond 2050? Is this a 5-year process, or is this are we looking to be done with the plan by 2025, or is it 2023? What's the, I know you've said it and I'm sorry to ask again, but would you mind?
No, I'm happy to go over that. So we have broken this project into 2 phases. The first one is looking at housing, economic vitality, transportation, and the parks and anything related to Overlake, really. So all of those pieces are in phase 1. That is, we're looking to adopt all of those pieces. So that's new policy, new codes and regulations, all of that we're hoping to get adopted towards the end of the first quarter of 2023. So those pieces we're definitely going to look for sooner. All of the rest of our conversations about capital facilities, natural resources, all of our human resources updates, all of those, everything else that falls under this particular project, that goes into phase 2. And those policy and regulatory updates we're looking to have done by the middle of 2024.
Okay, thank you.
You are very welcome. And that timeline is on our website. So if you want a handy dandy little chart and what is in which phase.
Okay, I'll check out the website. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for pointing out the error that you saw on our website the other day.
Oh yeah,
Get that
yeah.
fixed. So thank you.
Yeah, just trying to think in the Parks and Trails area as well. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. So the Arts and Culture Commission, I'm going to be at tomorrow night, and we're having some conversations with that because the parks element is parks, arts, and culture element. It's all together. But we were just at the parks not that long ago for I think the second or third time. But
Yeah,
you'll see us again several
yeah.
times.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. Well, we have a lot of work to do to help
Yeah,
guide as much as we can. So yeah,
yeah.
it's
And I think especially with Overlake, as we start to have some interesting conversations about the growth in Overlake and what that means from a services need perspective, I think we're definitely going to be having some chats with you as a commission and making sure that the conversations are as comprehensive as possible, right? That we look at it as from as many perspectives as we do. I think that's one of the concerns that a lot of our community members have is we know we're seeing a lot of growth in Overlake, but we have underserviced it today. So how do we go forward knowing that we've underserved and then we have to fill some gaps even before we can start to move forward into the future. So I think that's definitely going to be a big part of the conversations that we're going to be having with you guys over the next year for sure.
Yeah, good, good. I feel the same way, so I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Well, again, thank you for joining us tonight.